Hi Tom, welcome back, 10 by 6.
Hello Jace, great to see you mate. Hello everyone.
And you, yeah, hello everybody, and welcome to this week's hopefully non-reactionary corporate media show. In a way it is, isn't it, Tom? In a way it is, because what we're focusing this week is on the Jimmy Savile story, which, you know, the can of worms has been opened by Boris Johnson at the dispatch box, in which he levelled an accusation at Keir Starmer that he was ultimately responsible for not prosecuting Jimmy Savile back in 2009, and bearing in mind that Keir Starmer had become head of the Department for Public Prosecutions in 2008. So he was fundamentally overseeing everything that took place within that department. And Johnson has made this accusation. But what has happened thus far is that the accusations from the corporate media and from some Conservative politicians, not to mention other politicians in other parties, is that it's a conspiracy theory. It's fake news that's long since been debunked. But also we're going to lead on from that. That's just to start us, because we're going to lead on from that, because if you look at Jimmy Savile, the reason why many consider this to be a can of worms that Boris Johnson probably not opened is because of Jimmy Savile's long association with the Conservative Party and his long friendship with Margaret Thatcher, who was Prime Minister between 1979 and 1990. And the fact that in 1990 he was awarded a knighthood by the Conservative Party. So ultimately, it could be a very, very clever strategy in which he is aiming to drip this idea about Keir Starmer's responsibility for Jimmy Savile, or it could be a strategy that sees him sink without trace, depending upon which way the corporate media go in terms of levelling up their sympathy and understanding on this. Do they go with Johnson and pummel Starmer, or do they go with Starmer and see Johnson removed, replaced? So that would be an interesting future for us to detail. But what's your initial take on this then, Tom?
Well, I think this is one that's, as you say, we want to be proactive in the issues we discuss and sort of put forward an agenda, but sometimes we just have to respond to events, you know, such as the latest Tory corruption scandal, the latest bunch of lies from Boris Johnson, or in this instance, this issue that has cropped up this week, which has the potential to be a big and significant influential issue. And I think that from discussing it with you prior to recording, this is an issue which, Jace, you and I will differ somewhat upon. I think I'm more willing to believe the various articles that put out supposed facts saying that Keir Starmer, and this is by full fact, the BBC, the Guardian, various other newspapers have now published some details saying that Keir Starmer was absolutely nothing to do with the decision not to prosecute Savile in 2009, that it didn't meet the evidential threshold required by the CPS, mostly because the victims were unwilling to testify, so they didn't prosecute, and that Keir Starmer was nothing to do with that decision. And then in 2013, once it became clear that, you know, that Savile was a horrific paedophile abuser, after his death and all the witnesses came forward. Once that was clear, Starmer ordered an independent review of the CPS's actions and decision, got an independent lawyer to carry out that review, and improved their processes for dealing with sex abuse allegations. Now, that's what's been stated as fact, and I'm I'm not a fan of Starmer for all sorts of reasons. I believe he's destroying the Labour Party and has broken all the promises that he made to become leader, and lots of things that we won't go into today. Reasons why I'm not a fan of Starmer at all. Obviously, he's lurched the Labour Party significantly to the right, and booted out more or less all the socialists that were in the Labour Party. But I'm not. I don't think it's reasonable to attack Starmer for something that I don't think he has responsibility for. However, I think you have a somewhat different take on this, Jace. Is that right?
My take isn't to, because I have no evidence, to suggest that Keir Starmer knowingly knew about Jimmy Savile and influenced any decision that was made not to prosecute him in 2009. I'll leave that for others. We know how the systems work. We know how the establishment covers up. But we're not part of that club. It's an exclusive club. We're not invited into it. We're not part of it. And I've said to you on many occasions before, Tom, it's the reason why I don't believe we live in a democracy. We live in a plutocracy. It's determined by a small, powerful elite group. And I use the word elite advisedly, certainly not superior to us, who make decisions on our behalf, mostly in their own interests. And I'm concerned that the records for the reason the decision was made by the police officers, who were heavily criticised in that independent report, why the CPS are allowed to get rid of that type of documentation. That could be accessible to the public, it could be accessible to academics, etc., who would be able to look through that information and make a decision as to whether actually they were right at that time. I mean, you can take off people's names. You don't have to know who said it. You can make them anonymous, but it allows it to be scrutinized outside. But the fact that these institutions don't allow that scrutiny means at the end of the day, the only people we've got to believe are the very people who made this mess in the first place. Now, 4 people came forward, apparently, who the police stated none of them were prepared to stand up in court and make these accusations publicly. Now, it may be more than 4, it may have been less than 4, but 4 is the figure that we were given. So 4 people from 4 different backgrounds came forward to make these accusations about Jimmy Savile. Now, I guess if you'd suffered abuse upon abuse upon abuse, and you'd actually made that step to come forward and report this person, for me, it's a case where you have a red flag. You have a situation here where a very well-known person from 4 different places has been accused of committing heinous crimes, and yet these police officers and their superiors, the solicitors working within the CPS, at no point red flagged it. At no point said, hang on a minute, we have a very famous person here, 4 different people from 4 different places who've made these accusations, having suffered this disgusting abuse. They're not prepared, let's say, to stand up in court, but we need to take this higher up, because it may well be that we can do something in order to get other people to come forward who will be prepared to stand up in court, and then we can push forward with a case for a prosecution. The fact that it was shut down so early, and Keir Starmer, who was head of this, or any of his close associates at that level were not made aware of it suggests two things. Firstly, the absolute incompetence of those people at the lower level, i.e. the police office and the solicitors, or the culture within it, that department, suggested that the people who were being employed didn't feel able or didn't have the sense to red flag it, bearing in mind if 4 people had come forward and made these accusations, there was probably a lot more who were experiencing or who had experienced serious sexual abuse over a long period of time, and that was just absolutely dismissed. So even though I'm not saying, because I have absolutely no evidence that Keir Starmer was at any point part of the process for determining whether this was pushed forward, I am saying that the culture and the way in which these abuse cases were handled within his department is abysmal.
Okay, but as a result of it becoming abundantly clear how heinous an abuser Savile was after his death, Starmer instigated an independent review of the CPS's actions, which led to an improved system, led to improvements in their procedures for dealing with such allegations, because it recognised the failings at the time. But there's nothing I've seen that suggests that Starmer was in any way, involved with that decision in 2009. I guess you're arguing that as head of the organisation, he was ultimately responsible.
He was vicariously responsible, Tom, just like if we're going to accuse anybody at the top of the institution, any institution, that ultimately, in the olden days, people carried the can. If something like this had happened, going back 20, 30, 40 years, and it came out in the media, that person was asked to step down, probably replaced by another establishment figure who was no better, but they just changed the face and the public moved on. We've now, I believe, got into a culture where we don't even do that. What we do is we leave the same faces in place who then ask for an independent inquiry and then report back that they themselves were not responsible. They then become the leader of the official opposition in this country. It's how times have changed.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously, we know that the establishment looks after itself, and sacks the minions if necessary, if somebody has to take a fall. But the establishment figures always look after themselves and cover things up. This is obviously, we'll just move on to a couple of other related bits to do with this discussion, but it's obviously something about which you and I disagree, and the viewers will have to make their own mind up. As we've said, really, my view is that I personally believe the stated facts that Starmer was nothing to do with the decision, and I think it's utterly disgraceful for Johnson to suggest otherwise. Johnson specifically said, talked of him failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile. Starmer was nothing to do with the decision, and then I think that's a disgraceful, abhorrent slur by Johnson. You're obviously somewhat of the opinion that as head of the organisation at the time that made the decision and made mistakes, obviously, that Starmer is vicariously responsible. Anyway,
but also, can I just make one more point as well, Tom? You said, and you reported this as fact a minute ago, you said that as a result of the investigation, improvements were made. Have you got anything to measure that? Do we know that the improvements have been made, or are we just taking their word for it?
Well, we're told that, and we're also told that we're also given quotes from various people who have praised Starmer for making those improvements. I've read numerous people, I guess lawyers within the Crown Prosecution Service who've praised Starmer for making those improvements. And of course, what Starmer's the official line on this from Starmer's point of view has been backed up by lawyers representing the victims who have said It's outrageous for Johnson to have said what he said. Starmer was nothing to do with the decision at the time. That's very clear. And you know, this is lawyers representing the victims have been very dismissive of what Johnson has done with this slur. So yeah, I mean, I just want to move on to talk about another aspect of it,
absolutely,
which is just a quick thing, which is my own personal view on this, which is that I honestly think that Johnson has made a big mistake by letting the cat out of the bag so early. Again, this is something about which we somewhat differ in opinion, but up to now, Starmer has been given a more or less free ride by the Tories, and particularly by the Tory press, by the right-wing media, the billionaire-owned media, have not attacked him yet. I'm sure they're waiting until nearer the election, and if they decide they're not supporting him, then they're going to, you know, unleash the dogs of hell as they did with Corbyn and all sorts of lies and slanders. But you know, and that include, we've always known since Starmer was elected, we've always known that if they want to, they will call him, you know, they will suggest that he's embraced paedophiles. They will call attention to the Savile issue. They will call attention to his bringing Peter Mandelson back into the Labour Party and cite Peter Mandelson's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. So they will, if they want to, the right-wing press will, pre-election, I assumed it would happen in the run-up to the next election, they would attack him for being a friend of the paedophiles. And secondly, they would attack him for being an arch Remoaner, someone that was strongly in favour of remaining in the EU. And they will threaten, they will suggest there's a threat that he will want to take the UK back into the EU and get all the people that voted Brexit and voted for the Tories in the last election for Brexit reasons to vote again against Labour. So we've always known those are the kind of attacks that they're ready to strike with at the opportune time. And you know, I would view that as being probably in the run up to the election, the 6 months or so run up to an election. I think the fact that Johnson let this thing about Savile out of the bag in the Commons, I think it's just a sign. I think he's done that too early. I think it's a sign that he was under so much pressure himself that he resorted to using something that they Tory strategists were intending to use much later on, closer to the election. And I actually think now it'll be pretty much debunked and won't be that harmful to Starmer, whereas near an election, I think it could be more harmful. So I actually think Tory strategists will be very cheesed off with Johnson for going ahead and making that attack, spurious attack, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, from the point of view of analysing voting, so psephology, the actual elections normally are determined by a couple of 100,000 voters in certain marginal constituencies, and that most of our votes mean jack squat. Most people will vote for either one establishment party or another establishment party, and the Labour Party will gain power if, for example, Rupert Murdoch has decided that the leader of that particular party is a flexible, malleable leader who will largely do what News International and other billionaire corporate media want him to do. So I think we shouldn't give too much credence to the electorate being overly sophisticated and empowered to really make a decision about the direction this country takes. I think ultimately that's decided elsewhere. And all the corporate media do is, unfortunately, by and large, is to herd at the right times. So the fact that Boris Johnson has gone early, late, whatever, I don't think makes an awful lot of difference, to be totally fair. I mean, Your argument is he's gone early and they could have used this to much more supersonically closer to the election. My argument is he's gone whenever he's gone with it, and they can just water it as and when if they want to, depending upon who Murdoch, etc., has chosen to be the next Prime Minister. So it's neither here nor there as far as I'm concerned. But I would like to say also, though, that we may see the corporate media go that Sir Keir Starmer was a Ramona. Also should be borne in mind that the current Brexit Secretary, Liz Truss, was absolute Ramona, as was Boris Johnson up to 24 hours before the referendum. It just depends on whether the corporate media are prepared to go with that, or they're going to go and hide it, as they have been doing for the last 5 years. So, you know, there's plenty of ammunition that any of the establishment parties can throw out against the other. It's just, as I say, it's entirely dependent on whether it's communicated outwards to the public.
Absolutely. Before we finish, Jace, you were going to share some information about Savile's sort of actual links and friendships with a particular political party.
Yep, I want to move us on now to a brilliant article by Tom Pride. And in it, he talks about the relationship that Jimmy Savile had with the Conservative Party. And one of the reasons why I think, you know, again, going back to what I've said about the corporate media, of course, but why it's a can of worms, because we're not talking about Jimmy Savile being a lifelong supporter of the Labour Party or any other political party. We're talking about Jimmy Savile being a lifelong supporter of the Conservative Party. So one of their most famous voters and supporters was a heinous, prolific child sex abuser. And when you look at some of the people who have supported Jimmy Savile along the way, Margaret Thatcher was a very good friend of Savile. They lunched together. They even spent many Christmases together. And she personally lobbied for his knighthood. Baroness Trumpington, the Tory Baroness, was the first to appoint Savile to a hospital board in 1987, where he was a prolific sex abuser. When she was Tory Health Minister, she always referred to Savile as Dr. Jimmy Savile in official documents, despite him having no medical qualifications at all. So you think about how he wandered around these hospitals, including morgues, raping dead bodies, raping living bodies. Earl of Dundee, Tory peer and whip, the Eton-educated hereditary Earl, was a big fan of Savile. He would also regularly elevate Savile to doctor in his fulsome praise of him. This is from Hansard, the operational management of the hospital is in the hands of a specially formulated task force whose best known member is Dr. Jimmy Savile. Dr. Savile has been involved with the work of Broadmoor Hospital for many years, and is now devoting his considerable talents to ensuring that the hospital functions smoothly during this difficult interim period before the new Special Health Authority comes into being. That vacuum that Savile filled, goodness knows what catastrophic effects he had on people's lives. Edwina Currie, who keeps being dragged on by the corporate media, especially Good Morning Britain and others, regularly. Currie loves Savile. She was the Tory minister who bizarrely decided to put the dodgy DJ in charge of secure psychiatric hospital Broadmoor. In a press release from the time, Currie had this to say about Savile: "He is an amazing man and has my full confidence." Peter Giaconelli, Tory Mayor of Scarborough. Giaconelli has now been revealed to have been part of a paedophile ring which included Savile and which was operating in and around Yorkshire for decades. Alan Franey, former head of Broadmoor and now Tory councillor. Franey was a close friend of Savile, regularly running marathons with him. And Franey was the CEO of Broadmoor at the height of Savile's sex crimes there. He is now a Tory councillor and deputy leader of Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council. I don't, you know, the idea that the Tory party, I mean, I think, you know, in terms of you letting the cat out of the bag, you know, it could be right, you know, because during the 6 weeks running up to an election, once the corporate media has chosen sides, there's almost nothing you can do about it. So it'd be only the independent media who would be trying to get that information out. And their reach, of course, is far less than the corporate media. But the idea now that the independent media can be proactive and get this information out and start asking the corporate media, why aren't you reporting this? This information is out there. Tweeting them, emailing them, Instagramming them, Snapchatting them, Facebooking them, doing anything to get the corporate media to answer as to why they've never taken this seriously, why they've given the Conservative Party a carte blanche to support a paedophile that he may have been dead since 2011, but the effects of what he did are still contaminating the life experiences of many, many, many people. And people are still voting Conservative. Now let's see how
people still voting Conservative, Jace, after things happen like Theresa May announces that they've lost the files on paedophiles.
Yes, no, I get that, but the problem is, mate, it's the corporate media who aren't blasting this on the page day after day. They made all that crap up about Corbyn, as you rightly said, and they repeated it, they repeated it, and they repeated it. Whereas they'll put something in the Mail or the Telegraph occasionally, but they've got a plan. And then they move on. If this plan was really to damage the establishment, sorry, if the outcome was to damage the establishment, they wouldn't touch it. Because they're all members of that exclusive, sinister club. So the point being here is before we finish off, Tom, is that when you look at the history of Savile and the Conservative Party, there is any amount of evidence and any amount of opportunity there for one, the corporate media to be dancing all over it for months, if not years, and two, the GPP and the CPS to be knocking on multiple people's doors, getting information together and getting a lot of these people in court. Unfortunately, then you find out that the police officers at the top in certain parts of the country were part of the very paedophile rings, that so was Savile. So the establishment want to do nothing else but keep it quiet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've got to go, Jace. As you know, we were time limited today because I've got an appointment, but it's been great chatting with you about all this, and hopefully our viewers have found it interesting. It's something Jace and I have some differing views on, but that's all good. And I'm sure our viewers will hopefully take a keen interest in it. And certainly we need to demand more from our media in all sorts of ways.
Absolutely. We've gone a little bit longer than we expected this week, but it's a really, really, really important topic. And again, it's only the independent media, I think, who are really taking this seriously. So it's up to 10 by 6 to bring this to people's attention. What they do with it is up to them. You take care. Have a good week. See you next week, mate.
You too, mate. Thanks a lot, Jace. Cheers, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Bye. Bye.